Nobody thought the soft-spoken, gentleman actor would ever lose his cool on live television. But when Joy Behar crossed the line that should never be crossed, Michael B. Jordan showed America a side they'd never seen before. The studio lights of The View gleamed with their usual warmth as the familiar theme music faded into the background. The iconic table sat center stage, surrounded by the show's co-hosts who were settling into their chairs with their morning coffee and practiced smiles. It was Tuesday morning, and everything seemed perfectly normal in the world of daytime television. Joy Behar adjusted her reading glasses and shuffled through her note cards with the confidence of someone who had been doing this job for decades. Her silver hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless under the harsh studio lighting, and her expression carried that familiar mix of skepticism and barely contained sarcasm that had made her both beloved and feared by guests across the entertainment industry. Whoopi Goldberg sat at the head of the table, her presence commanding even in silence, while the other co-hosts made small talk and prepared for what they expected to be another routine celebrity interview. The audience buzzed with excitement, phones already out and recording, ready to capture whatever memorable moments might unfold. "Ladies and gentlemen," Whoopi announced with her trademark authority, "please welcome the incredibly talented Michael B. Jordan." The audience erupted into enthusiastic applause as Michael emerged from backstage, looking every inch the Hollywood superstar he had become. Dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit with a crisp white shirt open at the collar, he moved with the easy confidence of someone completely comfortable in his own skin. His smile was genuine and warm as he waved to the audience, that same charismatic presence that had captivated moviegoers around the world. He made his way around the table, offering genuine hugs to each of the co-hosts, saving a particularly warm embrace for Whoopi before settling into the guest chair. Everything about his demeanor suggested this would be another pleasant, predictable promotional appearance. "Michael, welcome back to The View," Whoopi said warmly. "It's always a pleasure to have you here." "Thank you for having me," Michael replied, his voice carrying that familiar blend of strength and gentleness that had made him America's sweetheart. "I'm excited to be here and talk about the new project." Joy leaned forward slightly, her eyes already glinting with that particular look that regular viewers had learned to recognize as trouble brewing. "So Michael, before we get to the movie, I have to ask about something that's been bothering me." The other co-hosts exchanged subtle glances. Michael's expression remained pleasant, though something almost imperceptible shifted in his posture. "Of course," he said politely. "What's on your mind?" Joy smiled, but there was nothing warm about it. "Well, you've been very vocal about social justice issues, Black Lives Matter, supporting marginalized communities. All very admirable, very politically correct." The temperature in the studio seemed to drop a degree. Michael's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "I don't consider basic human rights to be politically correct," he said carefully. "I consider them to be morally necessary." Right, Joy said, waving her hand dismissively. "But here's what I don't understand. You make these beautiful speeches about equality and justice, and then you go and make millions of dollars playing characters who solve their problems with violence. Isn't that a bit hypocritical?" The question hung in the air like a challenge thrown down at dawn. Michael blinked slowly, processing what he had just heard. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" he asked, his voice still controlled but carrying a new edge. Joy leaned back in her chair, clearly enjoying herself. "I'm just saying, you can't have it both ways. You can't preach about peace and nonviolence and then make your fortune glorifying gun violence and toxic masculinity. Don't you think that sends a mixed message to your young fans?" The other co-hosts looked increasingly uncomfortable. Sunny Hostin shifted in her seat, while Sarah Haynes glanced nervously between Joy and Michael. Even Whoopi's expression had grown serious. Michael took a slow, measured breath before responding. "Joy, I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding in your question. The characters I play are fictional. The causes I support are real. Entertainment and advocacy can coexist without contradiction." But Joy wasn't backing down. If anything, she seemed energized by his response. "Can they though?" she pressed. "Because I've done my research, Michael. Black Panther, Creed, Without Remorse, in every single one of these movies, you solve problems by fighting people. You literally make money by perpetuating the very stereotypes about black men that you claim to be fighting against." The studio fell completely silent. Even the audience seemed to sense that something had shifted dramatically. Michael's jaw tightened, and for the first time since sitting down, his famous composure showed the first hairline cracks. "That's an incredibly reductive and frankly insulting take on my work," he said, his voice still controlled but noticeably harder. Joy shrugged. "I'm just calling it like I see it. You want to be seen as this conscious, socially aware activist, but your career is built on playing angry black men who use their fists instead of their words. How is that helping the cause? The other co-hosts were now visibly cringing. Sunny looked like she wanted to crawl under the table, while Sarah appeared to be mentally calculating how quickly they could cut to commercial. Michael leaned forward slightly, his eyes never leaving Joy's face. Let me explain something to you, Joy. The characters I play aren't stereotypes, they're complex human beings dealing with real issues. Chala fought to protect his people and his nation. Adonis Creed fought to prove himself and honor his father's legacy. These aren't angry black men, these are heroes with depth, motivation, and purpose. But Joy wasn't finished. She held up her hand as if to stop him. Oh please, she said with a dismissive laugh. Spare me the artistic interpretation. At the end of the day, you're still just another actor getting rich off of violence, and then you have the audacity to lecture the rest of us about social responsibility. It's performative activism at its finest. The words hit like a physical blow. Michael's composure, which had been steadily eroding throughout the exchange, finally began to crack in earnest. His hands, which had been resting calmly in his lap, slowly clenched into fists. Performative activism, he repeated, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. That's right, Joy continued, clearly oblivious to the warning signs everyone else in the studio was picking up on. You show up to a few rallies, post some inspirational quotes on Instagram, and then you go back to your mansion feeling good about yourself while continuing to profit off the very problems you claim to care about solving. Whoopi tried to intervene. Joy, maybe we should. No, let her finish, Michael said, his voice steady but carrying an unmistakable edge of steel. I want to hear this. Joy smiled triumphantly, thinking she had him on the ropes. All I'm saying is that if you really cared about these issues, you'd use your platform differently. Instead of making superhero movies, why don't you make films about real change? Why don't you put your money where your mouth is instead of just talking a good game? Michael stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, but everyone in the studio could feel the power behind it. You want to know what performative activism looks like, Joy? He asked quietly. Enlighten me, she said with a smirk. It looks like a wealthy white woman sitting in a comfortable studio, making millions of dollars talking about other people's work, while contributing absolutely nothing meaningful to the causes she claims to care about. The studio erupted in gasps from the audience. Joy's smirk faltered slightly. Michael wasn't done. You want to talk about my foundation that has provided scholarships to over 500 underprivileged students? You want to discuss the community centers I've helped build in underserved neighborhoods? Maybe we should talk about the millions I've donated to organizations fighting for criminal justice reform? His voice was rising now, controlled fury building with each word. Or maybe, he continued, we should talk about how you sit here every day, making jokes and commentary from your position of privilege, while never actually doing anything to help the communities you claim to support in your virtue signaling segments. Joy's face was flushing red now, her earlier confidence evaporating. I don't think you have the right to. The right? Michael stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backward. You question my right to speak on social issues because I'm an actor. You reduced my entire career to violence and stereotypes. You accused me of performative activism while you perform activism for a living. The other co-hosts were frozen, unsure whether to intervene or let this play out. The audience was completely silent, phones capturing every moment of this unprecedented breakdown. Joy tried to regain control. I think you're overreacting. I was just trying to have a conversation about. About what? Michael's voice boomed across the studio. About how you think you can tear down a black man's accomplishments and contributions because they don't fit your narrow definition of acceptable activism. He began pacing behind his chair, his famous composure completely shattered now. You want to know what's really performative, Joy? It's sitting here and pretending to care about social justice while actively participating in the same system that seeks to diminish and discredit black voices when they don't conform to your expectations. Joy's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. For perhaps the first time in her television career, she was genuinely speechless. Michael stopped pacing and looked directly into the camera. Let me be clear for everyone watching at home, he said, his voice carrying across the silent studio. I don't need validation from anyone in this room or watching this show about the work I do or the causes I support. My impact speaks for itself. He turned back to Joy, who was now visibly shaken. But what I won't tolerate is someone who has never put herself on the line for anything meaningful trying to lecture me about authenticity and commitment. The studio remained dead silent. Even the production crew seemed afraid to move. Michael picked up his jacket from the back of his chair and began putting it on with deliberate, measured movements. "Joy, you asked me about mixed messages," he said, his voice now deadly calm. "Let me give you a clear message. You don't get to question my commitment to my community while contributing nothing to that same community yourself." Joy finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." Michael held up his hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "No misunderstanding," he said firmly. "You showed your true colors today. And frankly, they're not very attractive." He straightened his jacket and looked around the table at the other co-hosts, all of whom were staring at him with a mixture of admiration and shock. "Whoopi, Sunny, Sarah, it's always a pleasure to see you. Thank you for having me." Then he turned back to Joy one final time. "And Joy?" he said, his voice carrying a finality that made everyone in the studio hold their breath. She looked up at him hopefully, perhaps thinking he was going to apologize or walk back some of what he had said. "You're done." The two words hit the studio like a thunderclap. Joy's face went completely white, her eyes widening in shock and disbelief. "Excuse me," she managed to stammer. Michael's expression was stone cold. "You heard me. You're done. Done questioning my integrity. Done diminishing my work. Done hiding your own inadequacies behind false concern for social justice." He turned toward the exit, then paused and looked back over his shoulder. "And if you ever, and I mean ever, disrespect me or my community like that again, you'll find out exactly how committed I am to defending both." With that, he walked off the set with the same confident stride he had used to enter, leaving behind a studio full of stunned silence and one talk show host whose world had just been turned completely upside down. The cameras continued rolling as Joy sat frozen in her chair, her face a mask of shock and humiliation. The other co-hosts exchanged glances, clearly unsure how to proceed. Finally, Whoopi cleared her throat and looked directly into the camera. "We're going to take a quick break," she said, her voice professional despite the chaos that had just unfolded. "We'll be right back." As the studio cut to commercial, the audience burst into a mixture of applause and excited chatter. Phones were already uploading clips to social media, hashtags were forming, and the internet was beginning to explode with reactions to what would undoubtedly become one of the most talked-about moments in daytime television history. Joy remained seated at the table, staring at the empty chair where Michael had been sitting just moments before. Her earlier confidence had evaporated completely, replaced by the dawning realization that she had just made a catastrophic mistake on live television. The aftermath was swift and merciless. Social media erupted with clips of the confrontation, with hashtags like #MichaelBJordanWasRight and #JoyBehar cancelled trending within hours. News outlets picked up the story, celebrity friends voiced their support for Michael, and Joy found herself facing the kind of backlash she had never experienced before. Within minutes of the segment ending, Twitter was flooded with reactions. Ryan Coogler, director of Black Panther, tweeted, "Michael B. Jordan has always been a man of integrity. What happened today was disgraceful, and Joy Behar owes him an apology." Octavia Spencer wrote, "Watching someone attack a good man's character while he's trying to promote positive change is heartbreaking. Michael handled himself with more grace than she deserved." The clip spread like wildfire across every platform. TikTok users created reaction videos, breaking down every moment of the confrontation. YouTube channels dedicated entire episodes to analyzing the exchange. Instagram influencers shared their thoughts in lengthy posts. The consensus was overwhelmingly clear: Joy had crossed a line that should never have been crossed. Behind the scenes at The View, panic was setting in. Producers huddled in emergency meetings, trying to figure out how to handle the fallout. Phone calls were made to network executives, publicists worked overtime, and damage control strategies were hastily assembled. But the train had already left the station, and there was no stopping it now. Meanwhile, in her dressing room, Joy sat staring at her phone in disbelief as notification after notification poured in. The comments were brutal and unrelenting. People who had never heard of her before were calling her out. Longtime fans were expressing their disappointment and disgust. The very people she thought she was speaking for were turning against her. "How did this happen?" she whispered to herself, scrolling through tweet after tweet condemning her behavior. She had walked into the studio that morning thinking she would score points by challenging a celebrity's activism. Instead, she had destroyed her own credibility and humiliated herself on national television. The network's phone lines were jammed with calls from angry viewers demanding Joy's removal from the show. Advertisers began expressing concern about being associated with the program. The View's official social media accounts were flooded with comments calling for accountability and change. But perhaps the most telling reactions came from within the industry itself. Fellow journalists and media personalities who had worked with Joy for years were publicly distancing themselves from her comments. Veteran reporters expressed shock at her unprofessional conduct. Even some of her closest allies in the media remained conspicuously silent, unwilling to defend behavior that was clearly indefensible. The story made headlines around the world. International news outlets picked up the confrontation, analyzing it as a case study in media bias and racial insensitivity. Academic experts weighed in on the broader implications of what had transpired. Cultural commentators used the incident as a launching pad for discussions about privilege, accountability, and the responsibility of media figures. Michael B. Jordan, meanwhile, maintained his dignity throughout the chaos. His representatives issued a brief statement expressing disappointment in Joy's comments but emphasizing Michael's continued commitment to the causes he supported. He didn't engage in the social media pile-on or grant interviews about the incident. He simply continued with his scheduled commitments, demonstrating the class and professionalism that had made the attack on his character so outrageous in the first place. 3 days after the incident, The View was forced to address the controversy on air. Whoopi Goldberg opened the show with a carefully crafted statement acknowledging that the previous segment had missed the mark and expressing regret for any offense caused. But notably absent was Joy herself, who had called in sick for the third consecutive day. When Joy finally returned to the show a week later, she was a shadow of her former self. Her usual confidence was gone, replaced by a tentative uncertainty that viewers immediately noticed. Her jokes fell flat, her commentary lacked its usual bite, and she seemed constantly aware of the cameras watching her every move. During the show's opening segment, she offered what could generously be called a half-hearted apology. "I want to address what happened last week," she said, reading carefully from prepared remarks. "My comments were poorly phrased, and I regret any misunderstanding they may have caused. That was never my intention, but the damage was already done." The apology rang hollow to most viewers, who saw it as damage control rather than genuine remorse. The comments section of the show's YouTube channel was disabled indefinitely. The View's ratings began to decline as longtime viewers turned away in disgust. Industry insiders began speculating about Joy's future on the show. Contracts were quietly reviewed, and lawyers were consulted about the feasibility of making changes to the hosting lineup. While nothing was announced publicly, sources close to the production reported that serious discussions were taking place about the show's direction moving forward. The incident also sparked a broader conversation about accountability in media. Other talk show hosts found themselves facing increased scrutiny of their own comments and behavior. The days of being able to say whatever came to mind without consequences seemed to be ending, and many in the industry were taking note. For Michael B. Jordan, the confrontation ultimately reinforced his reputation as a man of principle. The grace with which he handled the attack, combined with the strength he showed in defending his work and his community, only enhanced his standing in Hollywood and beyond. Offers poured in for new projects, speaking engagements increased, and his foundation received a surge in donations from supporters who admired his response to adversity. But perhaps most damaging of all was the simple truth that everyone could see. Michael B. Jordan, the soft-spoken gentleman who had always handled himself with grace and dignity, had been pushed so far beyond his breaking point that he had no choice but to fight back. And when he did fight back, he didn't use his fists or raise his voice in anger. He used the most powerful weapon of all, the truth. Joy Behar had spent years building her reputation as a tough interviewer who could handle any guest. But on this particular Tuesday morning, she learned that some lines should never be crossed, and some people will only take so much before they remind you exactly who you're dealing with. Michael B. Jordan had shown America that being a gentleman doesn't mean being a pushover. And Joy Behar had learned the hard way that sometimes, when you try to tear down a good man, you end up destroying yourself instead. The interview was over, but the conversation was just beginning. And for Joy Behar, sitting alone at that table as the cameras stopped rolling, the realization was finally sinking in. She wasn't just done with this interview. She might just be done, period. In the weeks that followed, the incident became a case study in media ethics courses across universities nationwide. Students analyzed the confrontation, examining the power dynamics at play and the responsibilities of journalists when interviewing public figures. The consensus among educators was clear: Joy's approach had violated fundamental principles of fair and respectful journalism. The entertainment industry took notice as well. Publicists began coaching their celebrity clients on how to handle hostile interviews, using Michael's response as a masterclass in maintaining dignity while standing up for oneself. His measured but firm rejection of Joy's premise, his articulation of his actual contributions to social causes, and his refusal to be diminished by someone else's narrow worldview became a template for handling media attacks. Meanwhile, Joy's career never fully recovered from that Tuesday morning confrontation. Though she remained on The View for several more months, her influence on the show diminished significantly. Her co-hosts began subtly correcting her more inflammatory comments, and producers started fact-checking her segments more rigorously. The spontaneous, controversial commentary that had once been her trademark became a liability that the show could no longer afford. The incident served as a reminder that in an age of instant communication and viral content, a single moment of poor judgment can have lasting consequences. For Joy Behar, those consequences would follow her for the rest of her career, a permanent reminder of the day she underestimated a good man and paid the ultimate professional price.